Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm here to talk about being lazy and improving your processes and making yourself happier by being impatient. Um, I've been working at Grant Street for a few years now, and I've been finding things that annoy me, and by being properly lazy, I've been finding ways to improve my life and make it better. And my goal here is that as I go along, you don't say, "Oh, I like your example. I want to do what you did." I want you to say, "Hey, I know something that annoys me, and I'm going to fix it." I want you to say, that thing that really bugs me, I can make it better. So, before I get started, I want to tell you that a lot of times you can fix that, not by you writing the code or by you fixing it. A lot of times somebody else has already fixed it for you, so go look. For example, Alex Gaynor gave this very similar talk at PyCon where I was. I said, "Hey, I can just play the video," and then I did probably not what you're looking for, but it was good, so you should watch it at some point anyway. Sometimes you find code that's like, "Oh, I love it. It's so close. It almost fixes my problem." That is super annoying. Sometimes you can fix their code. That's easier than fixing yours. Sometimes it just gives you good ideas. So, although finding the code that does exactly what you want is great, sometimes that's not something that you can actually use, but it's good to look. So one of the things that first annoyed me when I started working was my environment. I had used a Mac in the past, but I was really a OpenBSD user and had gotten used to having OpenBSD on my personal machine and was used to it, and so it annoyed me any less than this new Mac thing. I don't expect that you're going to switch to OpenBSD, but if you want to, come talk to me and I can give you hints and tips and stuff. But it's important that you just think, what are the main things that annoy me? And when you find something, reduce it. So at least OS 10 had, grep and things like that said, and Perl in the base system, which made it better than Windows. But it also had bash, and requires that you click things with the mouse, and it was just really too helpful in a lot of ways. But fortunately, on my machine, I got a copy of VMware Fusion, and I could install what I wanted in it, and the VM runs full screen, and I can try and avoid hitting the hotkeys that switch me out of it, and I'm getting pretty good at that. And it gives me the ability to actually get work done in a way that I like. And it nearly counts as writing my own tools because I do have an openbsd.org account, but not exactly, because I don't. There's very little that as part of it that I have time to work on there. And I mean, it comes down to I even compiled mksh and installed it and exec it into as my bash RC. It just re-execs mksh because the bash just doesn't. I push keys and it does things, and I don't know what. So one of the things that really annoys me about OS 10 is Aqua, the desktop manager thing. It just doesn't have the hotkeys that I like, and yeah, I mean, I could probably learn them and make it work, but like the other day I was working on something in Aqua, and I had it full screened, and all of a sudden, Mac decided, "Oh, I'm going to move this over here." And I don't know why, and so I said, "Okay, I'll switch back." About 5 seconds later, it moves it off the side again. Ended up having to not full screen the window, and yeah, I don't know. It was just terrible. So I'm glad that I use and can use CWM, which is the Calm Window Manager. Comes with OpenBSD, it stays out of my way, and I did actually submit my first C patches ever that got accepted to it. So also, again, writing my own tools, sort of, not really. This brings us on to the thing that really helps me kind of bring about the point that once you start fixing your problems and finding what annoys you, you will suddenly say, hey, I know how to make that easy. I can just fix that real quick. So one of the things that we do at work, of course, is tracking our time, what we're working on, so that we can bill things properly and all of this stuff. But instead of being like, okay, start out with but then you can say, hey, look, it's something I can fix. I know how to do this. And sometimes the tool is just a super small thing. So one of the great things about CWM that I like is that altshift / brings up an exec menu that's just a shell prompt. And you can type whatever you want in there. So I have this tiny little shell script here, and I type in altshift / sta, whatever I'm working on, like and suddenly now I'm working on a Yapsy talk. And then I have some reports that run off of these logs, and they're just plain text files, so I can go and edit them in case I forgot to do that for some reason. And a lot of other people say, hey, and it also updates the time tracking system so that I don't actually have to, all I have to do is go in and click, yeah, that looks right. Which makes me much happier than clicking through web interfaces. So other people tell me like, oh, I've solved this problem in this way. I use this tool for solving this same time tracking issue. Their solutions are like this menu thing in OS 10 that you can click to change stuff, and all sorts of other really things that really work for them to solve the same problem. And that's what and I'm happy for them that they have solved it, and I'm glad that I don't have to use their solution. And one last thing before moving on to kind of writing my own tools is that sometimes to get your tools written, all you have to do is complain a lot. We now have a whole team dedicated to making my life better. Of course, they are also apparently dedicated to making other people's life better at work, and so my tickets don't always get to the top, but they're at least working on them. And one of the things that they added recently, I guess not that recently anymore, was we now have a dark pan, and we can use Carton to install things from it rather than the crazy way we were doing it before. So now we have much easier deployments and much easier ability to do this. I don't know how it's set up. I don't know what tools they actually used on the back end. I know they had to customize Carton so that it would say, hey, look, we depend on, instead of saying a dependency on this version of the module, we say this dependency on this ticket in that module. And so it looks up what version that is and automatically installs it. So I have been squeaking a little bit about moving some of these tools now that they're on in a version that can be released, now getting them actually released onto the GSG pan, or off of the GSG onto the C pan, and getting that put out there. But so far it's slow going, but it's working on it. So I found that as I was thinking about this, there's the 3 great traits, and another great trait that I found was boredom. I was working on this single project for like 18 months, and I was working on being there at work. Most of the time on my team, we have like 5 or 6 different products and all of these other things, and so I'm continually like, oh, I'm working on this now, and I'm working on that now, and it's just that I prefer that very much, being able to do that. But this project I've been working on for the last 18 months, which is a new auction platform for a customer, really, so I've been focused on that, and so as I've been focused, I've noticed I've been getting bored, and being bored made things a lot more annoying, and I figured out that, wait a minute, yeah, it's annoying, but I've been using that to my benefit by building these tools to make it less annoying. And then it makes it less annoying for me, and it makes it less annoying for the other people who have to do stuff in this project. For example, a lot of people say, oh yeah, let's do code reuse, do whatever. Here's some examples of some code that was things that were annoying me that I was able to easily turn into like reusable code, and now it's a lot less annoying. These are all like interaction with external systems. Sometimes you can easily fake up an external system like a new blank database that doesn't have anything in it that you can just screw with and in your tests and make it just go. But sometimes you have to work with with time, and it's hard to go back in time. So we fake that with, I use test mock object, but it doesn't really matter. And we use test class for our infrastructure, although I'm now looking forward to trying test class Moose, and backed by Exodus' new test 2 stuff, so that was really cool. But it turns out that I'm too lazy to copy and paste. So we have, all of this little 3 or 4 or 5 lines of setup to do mocking what time it is. And you say, okay, use the module, mock it, blah, blah, blah. And so I was copying and pasting these 5 lines of code from here to there. And it was just like, oh, now I have to open a different file that has that in it. And, so I just copied them into a base class and said, oh, let me mock that. So it's just a single line now, and I can remember what the actual line is, because it's not crazy whatever the whole setup is. It's just, mock now. And that lets me easily do things like say, oh, I need these 2 or 3 or 4 bids to happen at exactly the same time so I can see what happens if people tie. And do we award properly? It was really hard to guarantee that if you don't have control over time. And sometimes you have to say, oh, I want these bids definitely to happen at different times. Sleeps in your test suite are terrible, very annoying. So then we also have mock send email. And that is what it says. We have lots of things that trigger an email to the customer, or trigger an email to the auction admin, or things like that. And previously finding out whether that triggered and whether that email went and what it said was difficult, because it was just like using send email and stuff. So now I added this small helper method that traps it into a mock object, and so you can easily say, hey, it's not going to send accidentally to some customer because I've fixed that, and I can introspect it and look at it and say, hey, it's got the right content. And it was just taking this little bit of code that it was a little bit difficult to figure out and a little bit confusing, but I stuck it in a test class module and could just use it from anywhere now. One of the really cool ones was the C-log. I don't know if you've used Catalyst much, but one of the things you can do from the context is say, hey, log this thing, and it logs the thing. Well, it doesn't send it to standard out, even in the unit test. It doesn't send it to standard error, and you can't trap it easily. So I wrote up a mock thing that does that. And that allowed me to make my test suite run completely silently, except for warnings that I didn't expect. That means when I run my test suite, I see things like possible precedence issue with control flow operator. And I'm like, what the heck is this? It's a new error that newer versions of Perl give, and it's super handy, and it finds real bugs in warnings. And so being able to clean up the test suite and make it so it runs nice was super helpful, and I was able to fix and it was not very difficult, but super helpful. And it was just all of these error messages on the screen were really annoying. And I fixed it, and that led to fixing actual problems. So sometimes you find code that you can reuse code from the strangest places, and that's one of the things that I find helps with my annoyance is if I don't have to write the code myself, or if I had to write it and I can reuse it, that's even better than having to write normal code. Not as good as somebody else doing it, but pretty good. So I keep an eye out for ways that you can repurpose the code you've already written. So first, I was writing tools that were making the testing less annoying, which was test fixture setup. So I want to say, oh, I've got this auction, and I want to test it, and I want it to see whether it runs in this way. Well, there's a lot of parameters to set up an auction. You know, the mid and bid, max bid, and the this and that, and the other thing, when it starts, when it ends, I don't know, there's probably 20 different settings that are required. And a lot of them, when you're testing something, you don't care about. And if you have them all in your test setup, in your test, in the introduction to your test, it's like, well, which of those are important when you come back later and you say, oh, there's all of these settings, which ones are you testing? Which settings are you testing? So I was, copying and pasting auctions from here to there with all of the settings and then changing the one I cared about and not knowing, oh, I copied it from here, but which of those settings was like way out of bounds that I was testing in that test? I don't know. I want it to be obvious which pieces I was testing that so that I didn't have to say, oh, all of this stuff, I don't care about it. I only care about changing this one setting. And I feel like so a lot of times Ovid has already figured all this stuff out and has written a module or given a talk. So go watch his talks about testing and things, and I recommend that you learn a lot. So in this case, I have a module that's not exactly like the one that Ovid has, but he's got one that's very similar. In this case, I have a wrapper around this in my test class object that just says setup auction, but it pretty much calls this same create with defaults. And what this is there's a model defaults auction module that has all of this logic that I spent a lot of time talking to the business people and saying, hey, if I change this setting, what does that affect? What things do I, or what values does changing this setting, what other thing, when I change this setting here, what impact does that have on other settings that should change? And some of them are obvious, some of them are not, but I was able to put that knowledge into this module so that when somebody else comes to write a test, they can just say set up an auction and change this one setting, and the defaults class automatically figures out, oh, I know what all the other settings should be, or at least a good enough approximation that you get a valid auction. And yeah, it took a lot of time to get this logic put into the module, but now setting up a new test is super fast and easy and totally not as annoying as saying, hey, trying to remember, oh, I want to set up this auction, and going and talking to the business people and saying, what would this affect if I change this? Because I've already talked to them and asked them. And somebody else doesn't have to do that too. So, for example here, if you say, hey, this auction, I want to create an auction that starts an hour ago. Well, the logic in the code says, oh, well, by default, we have 2-hour auctions. So it's going to end in an hour. I don't have to say end in an hour, it just does. And so now we've got an active auction. This other one, we say we make the end in 7 hours. That means it's going to start in 5 hours. And but you can, of course, because it's a testing module, say, hey, I want to create an invalid auction and make it's an auction that starts after it's already over. And you can do that. It doesn't actually, we'll find out what happens. Things didn't actually blow up too bad. But it just seems to, the ability to take things that annoy you and write them down and move them into a module so that you don't have to deal with them anymore is way handy. So I had this thing, and now the customer wanted to be able to set up sample auctions that the bidders could try to bid in, because this auction platform is going to be to run auctions irregularly. It's going to be big item auctions with specific that only run infrequently, or they probably will run more, but it's enough that they wanted to make sure that new bidders could come in and say, hey, I want to bid in a trial auction. I want to see how it works. I want to make sure that they understand and don't get confused because it's an important enough, big enough items that you don't want people to say, well, I didn't realize when I clicked submit, that meant I agreed to pay that much. Who knows? But, so we wanted to give them the ability to say, pick from some preset type of auction types, be able to tune a few settings, and then, pick a subset of what auction and things were available, what settings were available, and try and bid in that sort of auction. Well, hey, I've got this code that already knows that if I change these settings, what the other settings should be. I could just reuse these defaults and create this test or these sample auctions. And it was really easy, and now we have this nice ability to set up whatever auctions we want for people's trials. And so now it became part of this auction simulator that we have. So sometimes it goes the other way too, and sometimes you've written code that is in production, but you can then repurpose and say, hey, I can use that for powering my tests. And so this project, I started really paying attention to, oh look, I can reuse that code for something that it totally wasn't intended for, and paying attention to that made it so that I had to that I could reuse code that Past Me wrote, which is super handy. So now, one of the questions we had for the site was that we expect that we've got a whole bunch of bidders already potentially that are going to be coming to bid, and we've got a whole bunch of people who are signed up to be the second auction. So far, they haven't found somebody to be the first auction, so I can't show any demos or anything like that. But it's really cool. You have to just believe me on that. But we wanted to know, can we prove that it's going to be a successful sale? It's not going to be a technical glitch that, oh, when we get so many people bidding on stuff, all of a sudden the site melts down, and whatever. So that making sure this first auction was successful is very important, because there are a lot of other potential people to auction stuff off that are really going to be paying attention to this first one. So on to that, because we're going to go back to the simulator where the trial auctions were, and it turns out those were super boring. You create an auction, you go and you place a bid, and then you wait until it's over and you win. We did set it for only like a 10-minute auction, so it was still really boring. So we created these bid bots, and we added some logic with some very basic, I think there's like 5 parameters you can tune for when they bid and how much they bid and whatever. But we add a bunch of them to the trial auctions, and suddenly you have these fake bidders, and so you're in this auction and you bid something, and there's another somebody else bids against you, and now you can win, bid against people and try and win, and it's much more interactive and much nicer. And like I said, no live demo, but I wish I could, because it's really fun to see. So you can just bring it up and the graphs change live, and it's super cool. But I also was paying attention and making it so that I could test all of the little pieces of the bots and write tests for all of the things. And because I was doing that, I made the codes very with nice interfaces so that I could reuse it. Which means that when we needed to load test the site and we wanted to see what happens when people bid, we didn't have to like Mechanical Turk or anything like that. we had these bots that were really cheap, and I could just tie them into a www mechanize, and rather than pulling, oh, what's my bid out of the database, they scrape the site and say, hey, look, there it is in the box. I can see what my bid is. I can see, whether I should bid some more because I'm in the money or out of the money or whatever. I can see what the thing is, and it all, and so I was able to reuse that logic in those bots and tune them so that they were like ridiculously, they really wanted these items. And I had like 1,000 bots going, and we put a lot of load on the site. And I don't know if we could have 1,000 people that were all bidding every 30 seconds, but we definitely did. So we generated a lot of load, and that made the bottlenecks really obvious for what we were, what things we needed to tune and what things needed to be improved on the site. And we could easily just say, oh, let me run that again. Let me change some things, deploy some new code, and try that again. And it was super handy and super easy and not really not annoying at all. Except for, actually deploying the code because they're still working on that ticket, so. But a lot of the things that I fixed and a lot of things that annoyed me turned out that I didn't have to write this big thing and talk to the business people and figure out all of this logic and hide it in some code. A lot of times, a lot of the things I fixed were big impact from a tiny little change in the code where I was able to make these little changes and just tweak things a little bit, and suddenly it would work a lot better and make me happier and less annoying. So one of the things that came from this bot load testing was that the wording algorithm was really, really slow. And so I could write up some benchmarks and say, oh yeah, look at that, it's really, really slow. And then I was able to say, but then I was like, well, what about it is slow? So I wanted to profile it, NYT prof, yay. But benchmark, all of a sudden I have I'm running this benchmark 10,000 times and adding NYT prof to it and benchmarking all of the different scenarios that I was benchmarking and having one big NYT prof output for that single file was really annoying and didn't show me what I wanted to know about how the code was performing. So I wanted to profile it, and I could just run benchmark under NYT prof, but that wasn't as helpful, and it took a long time to run, and running it all those iterations didn't help me at all to see what was going wrong. But I could just add this. This was not a lot of code. I don't expect you to read it. It's just, this lets me run these benchmarks, but if I -d NYT prof, instead it creates a new profile output file for each benchmark. It only runs them one time rather than 1,000 times or whatever it was benchmarking before. And then I can view each of the different profiles and say, okay, this one's slow and this one is the one we expect the most, and we'll figure out what common things were slow and which things were only slow when certain things happen. And was able to just say, oh, I change out time these for profiler time these, and it's super easy. And the flame graphs are super cool. Brendan Craig is awesome. So I had all of these profiles, and I got it so that we could bid really fast, and was able to handle the load of all 1,000 of those bots that I talked about. And it was working really well. But then I was like, oh, you know what? I want to see how actual things around the site that weren't just the important bidding part work. How do I, go look at these cool graphs in Catalyst? Because when you try and profile Catalyst, you start up Catalyst with the NYT prof, and it writes everything into a single file, and it's super annoying. And then you have to have a static web server now that you've generated the HTML files to go view them, and I didn't have one on that machine, and it was, yeah, a pain. So, I was able to, so we have these things that somebody else wrote that are bundles for Catalyst. It's kind of a role, a moose role, but it has, like, you can have controllers and models and any kind of component and plugins and whatnot that automatically get injected into your app. When you say, hey, use this bundle, it inserts all of these controllers and things. And so I was too lazy to, like, stop Catalyst, start it back up in single process mode, and click the link one time, and then start it back up in the normal mode and try and see all of the graphs and everything. So I added this bundle that automatically, whenever you make a new request, which is super handy with AJAX requests where you don't have as much control over when it happens as easily. And it just, whenever you hit a new request, it just creates a new NYT prof log. And then there's another, so it adds a controller and an action where you can just go and you can view all of those logs. And when you have these logs, you can just click on them, and then it automatically runs the script or the generator and builds the HTML output. And then if the HTML output now exists, it redirects you to show you that. And you can see, oh, look, I am hitting this one action, and I can see how it performs, and then I can go make changes, and I can hit it again, and then I can go look at another graph, and then I can go back and compare them. And it was a lot less annoying than the manual way of running these profiles. So I went from, not really profiling ever to being able to just easily say, oh, I want to see how that performs, and just start it up with this flag that automatically loads the bundle. And it just works, and it works really well. And it makes taking something that is really annoying and that you don't want to do, and makes it something that's not bad. So now I have all of these tests, and I like to rerun them. And that means switching over to the window that has the tests in it, hitting up arrow, hitting enter, rerunning the tests. And that's really annoying. I'm too lazy for that again. So instead of that, I had seen this cool tool from that I saw in a Ruby gem something. I don't know, Ruby screencast of some sort, and they were like, oh look, I write my code, I save, and it just reruns the test for me in this other window. And so I was like, oh, that's awesome, I want to do that. So I added this thing, reprove, and so it works just like prove. It runs prove for you, just like you would expect. But if but when it gets to the end and it's run all of the tests, it just sits there and waits. And so then I can and the timestamp changes on it, and it reruns the test for me. And it handles all of the arguments just like prove does. It does all of the things just like, and it just runs prove for you. And for me, this wasn't a problem because it handles the test class things for me and is able to say, oh, you changed this module, or you only want to run the subtests for these modules and things. And it passes all that through to prove, and so you can run just a subset of tests pretty easily. Because if you touch something like this, that's an actual post or an actual module, it does rerun the whole thing. So that's that's the next possible step that I'll get to eventually, and if it ever annoys me enough that I'll add it so that I can have code coverage and then I'll be able to say, oh, what tests cover this piece of code that actually changed, and only rerun those, but who knows. But yeah, you can just easily say, it easily says, oh look, I've changed just these 2 tests, and rerun those. And it's takes this annoyance of of running tests that maybe you just are like, I'll run those at the end, I'll run those and hopefully remember before I submit my code for review. And a lot of times that didn't happen. So if when I find things that don't actually work, when I find things that don't actually work for me, then I try and figure out how I can automate that and make it so it's less annoying and just makes me happier. And so my end result, what I want to say is be impatient, be lazy, fix the things that annoy you. And I know that what I do is probably totally not what's gonna make you happy. But figure out what it is that makes it so that your code annoys you less and that your environment annoys you less, and fix it, make it better. So hopefully you thought of something that you can fix. And I guess any question? All it does is if you're running tests, it just watches for changes in the timestamp of the files and then runs prove again. So it's not a big difficult thing, but it lets me stick this in a window over, off to the side somewhere, and I've got my editor open, and I save, and I look over, oh yeah, look, the tests are running. I don't have to click over there and hit enter and do something crazy and remember that, oh, I've saved. And it sits there, in the corner of my eye. And if tests fail, then it's, oh, look, that's still failing. Or I've, written the test that fails, and then I save, and oh, look, now it works. I can switch back to writing tests. No, it doesn't, fortunately. But I know that similarly, some of the projects at work do have long startup times, and so they have something that keeps the Perl interpreter running and just internally to prove reruns the tests very similarly. So that could be another solution, but I myself only try and keep the startup, or fortunately the project I'm on, the startup time is pretty negligible.
You said that you were required to track the time that you work on particular customer projects. So how do you allocate the time that you spend fixing problems like the ones that you described?
Usually, it's just like, oh, I'll keep it as part of this project that I am working on. Because it's often, a lot of these were global kind of, I'm writing tests for this particular problem, and so I was able to, I think for the defaults thing, I actually filed a ticket that said, hey, I need to write this tool that will help me improve stuff in the future, and just track time against that ticket. But this reprove, for example, I was working on something outside of work, and I actually wrote most of the code outside of work, and then copied it in or brought it to work and customized it for our environment to some extent. Mm-hmm. So we have this layer on top of Catalyst that does code or dependency injection. So we can say, hey, my parent app or my parent, I inherit all of my actions and everything from this parent app, and so there's some code in there that's led to a different talk that I gave at the local Perlmonger meeting about because I learned way more about Perl's dependency model than I wanted to know. And so it inserts just into add-isa the correct modules in the correct order as part of, oh, look, I want to use this bundle, and it goes and looks and finds, oh, I've got a controller that says this, and it inserts that into your namespace for your app, rather than, and it says, oh, it's just a subclass of the bundled app or the bundled controller, and so suddenly that is in your app's namespace. But I don't know. I'm hoping that it is a really nice feature to use, but really ugly inside. So I don't know that it could ever be, something shareable, but it'd be cool. I have. I keep that it's on a guest because I keep like, oh, I should put it somewhere other than being in my home directory, but I keep not finding other things that take up my time, and I was like, oh, I'm totally gonna be able to put that in a real repo on GitHub and get it deployed somewhere before this talk, this conference-driven development. Yeah. I don't think I did, but I think that I do think I looked at it, and I don't recall any details of it other than yeah, I don't remember. But yes, I know that there were some other things on the CPAN that did something similar. So. All right, I guess I